Well, good morning, or maybe I should say good afternoon or even good night, because I understand we have more than 1,500 people attending this webinar on how companies are getting ready to deliver on sustainability reporting and assurance. So obviously a topic of great interest. This webinar is actually a joint effort between ecoDa, ECIIA, and Accountancy Europe. And at Accountancy Europe, we've been really pioneering the idea that corporate governance has a crucial role to play in the transition towards sustainable business model and economies. And our latest piece of work, I would say, in collaboration with ecoDa and ECIIA, is actually a paper that aims to offer concrete support to boards in their transition. And it takes the form of questions that we believe boards should ask themselves, because it all starts with questions. And that's actually what we're going to do today. We're going to be asking questions to a fantastic group of experts on the panel. And I would like to first introduce Sandra Gobert. Sandra is a board member of ecoDa, as well as the Chief Executive Officer of Guberna in Belgium. Welcome, Sandra.
Hi to all of you. Thank you, Olivier.
We are also joined by John Bedermacher, who is actually the president of the European Confederation of Institutes of Internal Auditors, so ECIIA. John, good to have you with us.
Thank you, Olivier. Happy to be here.
We also have with us Wim Bartels, my good friend Wim, who is the chair of the Accountancy Europe Sustainability Group. Wim is a newcomer, I would say, to the topic of sustainability. He's only been dealing with sustainability assurance and sustainability reporting for a good 20 years, Wim. Is that it?
That's absolutely correct, Olivier. Good morning, and thanks for having me here today.
Well, it's great to have a pioneer. Everybody is all of a sudden talking about sustainability these days, but here we have someone who's been dealing with the issue for more than 2 decades. So great to have you. Thank you for accepting. And finally, last but not least, I should say, we have with us Gilda Neyman. Gilda is on the board of directors and the steering committee of Chapter Zero Brussels. So obviously a group of people actually who are dealing hands-on with the matter. And my name is Olivier Boutelis. I'm the Chief Executive of Accountancy Europe, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. And, you know, when we talk about these issues, I always like to start with the why questions so that we are clear in our minds on why it is that we do the things that we do. What is our real motivation? And maybe I would like to start with you, Gilda, with your overview that you have from your position in Chapter Zero. Why do you think sustainability reporting and sustainability assurance matters? Tell us.
Well, thank you, Olivier. Very pleased to be here today. I think there's a lot more at stake than just compliance for your reporting regulation. Climate change is a defining issue of our time. We already see the effects in Europe, destroying lives and value. The flooding in Germany and Belgium that we had just in 2021, and we see disturbances still coming. The fires and droughts in Greece and Spain in 2023, as well as elsewhere in places like Pakistan. And we know it's just going to keep getting worse. The new head of the IPCC, Jim Sciea, told an FT conference recently, the world is in unknown territory now. So we care about sustainability reporting because climate change poses significant risks to the environment, to human health, to our economies, to social justice, to global security, and the well-being of our future generations. So it really requires urgent coordinated efforts from all of us at all levels so that we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to its impacts to build a more sustainable and resilient future. I really urge everybody this year to read the WEF Global Risks Report because it's really chilling. But it also says something very encouraging for all of us, which is that the collective actions of individual citizens, companies, and countries may seem insignificant on their own, but as a critical mass, they can move the needle on global risk reduction. And I think that's very important to keep in mind. It really requires all of us to be involved. So policies and regulations are being put in place to protect us and to protect our businesses for the future. So it's really up to us and including our boards to lead and make this happen.
That's a very cheering up message to start the dialogue today, I think. So the world is in a pretty bad state. All right. However, it seems to me that we're carrying right now, in addition, some very specific activities that are terribly unsustainable, and it's called war. And it seems to be going all around the globe right now. So we're not in a good place, and I think you're making a very good link between, the physical events that we face and policies. Now let's turn to business, and I'd like to ask John, why is it that companies are talking about sustainability and that it is getting higher and higher on the agenda? John, your view from an insider in business.
Yes, well, thank you for the question. Well, I think we have to realize that many companies have started this journey because of the new regulations. But at the same time, I hope and also know that many of the companies have an intrinsic motivation to save the planet. And that's where this all started with. But then due to the late start of many companies, complexity of the rules, and the slow progress, also because of the other things mentioned already, the war and all the geopolitical issues, time pressure now almost forces many companies to shift to compliance and reporting only, because they just don't have the time to do the full journey. And then that also may lead for them to aim for the minimum to make sure that they are fine at the end of this year. And if that's reachable, that's fine. If it's not reachable, it most likely will also increase the risk of greenwashing a little bit. And so hopefully companies, even if not this year, they will not forget to also change the business models and behavior, even if it's a little bit later. And if they don't, they might be compliant, they might receive limited assurance, but we will not be saving the planet. And just as an example, this morning I was reading the Dutch paper, and there was an article about a number of Swiss senior ladies winning a court case against the Swiss government for not achieving the sustainability targets and high temperatures in the summer impacting their health. And they won. And it's just a simple reason for all companies and all governments to take this as serious as possible. And that's the why.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, John. And indeed, we can see all around the globe litigation risk getting much higher and much serious. So much more serious. So that is also an additional threat that I think we need to look at. It's interesting. You're basically mentioning saving the planet and the need that for businesses to be involved in that. But what I'm hearing you say also is that we need to save business in a way, because without the planet and without natural resources, there will be no business, right? So let's save our businesses. I think that's an interesting slogan. And I'd like to ask Sandra, who has extensive experience on boards and great insights into what boards are doing now. How are they getting interested into sustainability? What angle are they taking? Because if I listen to John, I mean, it seems to me that it's still mostly driven by the need to comply with rules and policies. I think, Gilda made the case of why we have these rules and why, in reality, rules benefit us. So I see a little bit of tension here in a way. And I'd be really interested to know from Sandra what she sees happening in boards.
Thank you, Olivier. I would say, wow, I think we are right on target there with that question. And I see it as two questions, in fact. We're asking what are boards doing today? Are they doing something? I mean, it's also the title of the webinar of today. How can company boards lead to sustainability transition? But in fact, we're also asking, should they be doing something? And the answer to the two questions is different, of course. Should they be doing something? Yes, of course they should. And it's not only because of climate litigation. I think John did well to highlight the importance of climate litigation. And besides a company's director, I'm also a legal expert and an expert on directors' duties. And climate litigation is really becoming very important risks for board directors, so that's for sure. But that is not the reason they should be doing something. The real reason why they should be acting is because sustainability is not about reporting. And I present my excuses to all the reporting professionals present today, but it is not about reporting. It is about sustainable value creation. So it is about adapting, changing business models. It is about business transformation, and business transformation is about strategy, and strategy is one of the main roles of the board of directors. So it is about strategy, it is about leadership, and it is about monitoring what the management is doing. So, and that's to the first question. And to the second question, are boards doing something today? Yes, they are. They are evolving, but they are not evolving rapidly enough to really get a competitive advantage. I see on the field that there is a difference to be made between boards in sensitive sectors and boards in not sensitive sectors. For boards in not sensitive sectors, regulation and reporting regulation really is an eye-opener. It's a wake-up call. They realize they should be doing something. They're afraid, they're trying to oppose, they're trying to delay, etc. Whereas boards in sensitive sectors, they have been aware of the problem for much longer because they know that their business model is disappearing. And so they are working on the transformation, I hope for them at least, of this business model. And for them, regulation is only an additional push, reporting additional push to create awareness, to push this business transformation. And there the role of the board is, for what I see on the field, very specific. It's about being the link between the reporting part and the strategy part. You see it very well when you look at the evolution in the annual reports. At first annual reports, you had the sustainability reporting on the one side, and you had some explanations about the sustainability transformation, the transformation of the business model of the other side. Well, the role of the board is to make sure that these two parts really get integrated and that sustainability becomes a part of all decision-making of the company at all levels. So are board doing something? Yes, they are, but they're not doing enough. And it's really very important for business. Sustainability is the future of business. So it's really very important for boards to take up their role in this respect.
Or without sustainability, there is no business.
Within some years, there won't be any business anymore. That's right.
So, well, Sandra, you know what? I accept your apologies. You haven't shocked anyone in the reporting and assurance community. I think, we're working on sustainability reporting and assurance because this is one of the key contributions that professional accountants, whether they are external auditors or internal auditors, can bring. But I fully agree with you, and now I may shock some of my colleagues as well, but reporting is not going to transform the world. Much more needs to happen, which is really the reason why at Accountancy Europe, very early on, we focused on corporate governance. Now, you said something that really resonates with me. You mentioned, the necessity to gain a competitive advantage on how businesses in sensitive sectors were potentially more aware or more advanced. Now, we were talking about litigation. If I look at, the database of climate litigation, I see quite a large number of companies in, high-risk sectors like coal, oil, and others who do not seem to be willing to change their business model and who are facing tremendous waves of litigation. So what is the competitive advantage you're talking about? Can you expand a little bit on that? So
you're still talking to me, Olivier, I think, yeah?
Yes. I'm interested because you mentioned that, necessity.
I'm talking about the transformation of the business model. What these huge companies, and we won't name them, of course, but we all know who they are, and they're responsible for the biggest part of CO2 emissions worldwide. So they are trying to postpone as much as possible the transformation of their business models. I'm not on their boards, but I'm really very sure that this is a very important part of the debate during their board meeting. So if there would be directors willing to give testimonials on that, it would be very interesting. But it's I'm sure that their boards are looking into this, and they're just trying to postpone as long as possible to get out of these sectors, also because due to the geopolitical situation, we still need fossil fuels for some time. So this is a question of aligning interests and mitigating and how to mitigate conflicting interests and making the right decisions when they are confronted with conflicting interests. And again, I think it's a little bit the opposition between the compliance approach and the idea of trying to gain profit as long as possible without violating the regulation and the rules, and really advancing on a sustainability path and taking financial risks, because it's not only about changing the business model, it's also about changing the sustainability of the financing of the business model. So it is a very complex exercise, and it needs a lot of things. It needs courageous, but I will come back to that later, courageous decision-making from courageous and board members with the necessary expertise. It also needs the right financing, so it needs also stewardship with shareholders. And then it also needs a regulatory framework which guarantees a level playing field. So there's a lot of elements to take into account.
Thank you. And I hope I didn't, well, you, Sandra, and myself didn't shock our colleague Wim, who's been doing, sustainability reporting and sustainability assurance for such a long time. Wim, given that you've been involved in these issues, and I won't disclose your age, of course, but for quite some time now, I'd like to know what you have seen changing. I mean, what do you see happening on the market? Is, the conversation with your clients changing? What's going on?
Yeah, thank you, Olivier. A lot is going on. And also for me, Sandra, you don't have to apologize. I think we have to see reporting as an instrument in the wider transition that we are going to make and need to make. And that's also where I see the change. So as you say, Olivier, I'm in this for some time, and I'm coming from I call it the voluntary age, where everyone could write a report to its own benefit, as extensive as the company liked or as short as the company liked, and focus on the areas that they wanted to focus on. And with the new regulation that I think that creates that level playing field that Sandra also is referring to, in a sense of reporting on the same basis. I wouldn't say exactly the same information, but on the same basis. So what we see now happening is, of course, first of all, auditors are getting really engaged here. All of us, not only people like me who like this as a kind of an interesting area and a relevant area, but everyone needs to be engaged now. And that creates another level of interest also at companies. So you see now, first from the compliance perspective, companies saying and boards saying, okay, what do I need to do to comply? That is the first change I see. The second is boards start to realize that they can no longer set a target without any substantiation, then carry on for a number of years, realize that they don't make much progress, and then extend the deadline, right? Which happened quite a few times. By now, you need to have a target that will be substantiated, because the standards require you also to report on your action plans. Now, you don't have to have action plans. I tend to say that everywhere where I can, to say the standards are not requiring you to have action plans. But if you don't, you just need to disclose that you don't have an action plan. And everyone understands, and that's, of course, where boards call it more nervous, is, yeah, we have set a target, but are we able to achieve that? I read, like John this morning, the paper, but another article on the targets that banks have set themselves, because they were at, I think it was COP26, where they all said, yeah, we're going to go net zero. And now they realize, but can we really deliver on that? What is our role as the financial sector? So I think the wider development you see is a change in the attitude, if you like, towards sustainability, realizing the business relevance, realizing that you as a board have to deliver, and realizing that if you don't, that not only your company is at risk, but also maybe you are at risk for not delivering on, call it, the promises. And then there's much more to say, but I think leave it to these major developments that I see happening now. Oh, I don't hear you, Olivier.
I think it usually works better if the mic is on. Is
Absolutely.
that good? Now, you mentioned action plan, and action is indeed important. So what do you concretely recommend to your clients, in terms of action plan? Are you talking about a transition plan? Is there a difference I should see between transition plan and action plan?
Well, no, not really. A transition plan is we'll call it one of the type of action plans. And transition plan we generally talk about when we are referring to climate change and carbon emissions, carbon targets. But you could say the same for pollution or water usage or any other topic, and also, of course, on the social side. I think what I recommend my clients is first not to go out with a target without any thinking through of what it means from the business and for the business, and then second, to make sure that you have, as I said earlier, but that you have a certain level of substantiation of that action plan towards the target.
Science-based targets.
Yes, science-based targets for carbon, of course, but also when, for example, you talk about water use as another example, just not to get away a bit from climate, is to make sure that where you talk about efficiencies and 20% reduction, that you have looked at where can we achieve that in our business, which technology would we need to become further efficient, and do we think that could be available in, let's say, 5 years? So you need to make assumptions there on what is going to happen. And then comes, I think, the most important part, which is allocating resources to it. So making it part of investment plans, allocating people, making the business aware that you have taken a certain direction and you want all to weigh in, not only the board, not only the people from R&D, but also the business managers, the operational managers at site level. They all need to weigh in and need to be aware and have the resources allocated to deliver on it. And then externally for the reporting, of course, but don't overstate and be prepared to say, we aim to, but we couldn't make it. We are now looking for new opportunities, right? So transparency is of the essence here, of course. So.
I think it's very interesting you mentioned water. I mean, we're all, talking about climate because we all read the news in the morning. But water, to my view, is maybe even more important and related to climate, of course. But water is in absolutely all industrial processes. I mean, we always think about agriculture when we talk about water, but there is no, fashion industry, there is no car industry, there is no chips industry, there's nothing without water. So is that a topic that is now on the agenda of the board, water, from what you can see?
Well, I think honestly not as high as it should, because as you say, it's really in all and everything. We may not realize it, and that is because we all talk about climate change, right? So we all talk about carbon, net zero, and all that. The standard setters, they have, of course, started with E1, and E1 is climate change, not water. We say, as a standard setter, I'm on the Sustainability Reporting Board, for those of you who say, now, why does he say we? We have, as a standard, we have said, like, you need to apply materiality, but for climate change, if it's not material, you need to explain. So we put all our focus on climate change in communication. But as you say, I think water is much more essential. And if you go to food and beverages, that is becoming a critical issue yet already. We know from Spain, I read in my own country, for one or the other reason, we also forgot to act in a timely manner. So we now will face issues with access to drinking water. So we can all see the limitations coming. And when that comes, I think, to be honest, many companies, the boards are like people. So they need an incident first before they really start realize and act and say, and now we're going to make it a short-term issue. And water is, I think, unfortunately, one of these. But I don't want to distract the conversation here to water.
No, but it's interesting because it is something very tangible that, boards should have on their mind. I mean, being based in Belgium, I tend to think that, if there's no water anymore, we'll still be able to drink beer. But I'm really wondering whether beer can be used to cool off nuclear plants. I'm not sure, actually. I'm just not sure. I have a very important question for all the other panelists. Has any one of you been to Barcelona recently on holidays, weekend, or business trips? Anything? Raise your hands. No one went to Barcelona. Okay. I'm asking about Barcelona because I think it's an interesting city, very nice to visit. The only small problem is that they don't have water anymore. And it is actually boats leaving the harbor of Marseille that is, bringing water to the city of Barcelona. So remember, if next time you go, you'll be drinking French water in Barcelona for the time being. Maybe it will have to come to Belgium very soon. So maybe moving on, because you've said something very interesting on, and Sandra also made a point on that, on, what is on the importance of financing. So I'd like to go back to Gilda, actually, because Gilda, you're very, involved with the banking community. So what is motivating the banking community right now? And we mentioned these targets set by banks and all of a sudden realizing that it may be quite difficult to reach. So Gilda, what do you see happening in the banking community now?
That's for sure that they have to find the right place. And, we would like everybody to go faster, but then there's the reality. I think nevertheless, there are a number of interest for banking in getting very involved, in fact, in sustainability that make complete sense. Things like their own risk management, right? They are very exposed to everything that's going to happen in the environment through their different businesses, and by focusing on sustainability, they're able to protect their businesses. But also, it's important for their reputation and their brand value, because many customers of banks now expect them to be very ethical and to be on top of the issues of our time, especially following the financial crisis. And so this is an important area for consumers, for investors, of course, and for any of their other stakeholders. You have the question of regulatory compliance. They know already since almost a decade that the regulators are looking at this, and those exposures and could come with capital requirements or other requirements, and we have the green asset ratio already from the ECB. We have a number of requirements that they must fulfill, and there it really is a mandatory requirement. But there's also a positive side for their business, other than just their image. And I'm not talking about greenwashing, but really about doing real things. On one side, there are many companies that need support for their transition, especially the heavily carbon emitting ones. And by being involved in that, they help with their transition. And this is a need of their important customers. And finally, on the other side is the new economy and the new kinds of companies that are going to need financing and support. And so that's a big business opportunity for banks and financial institutions in the future. And finally, I mean, their own investors expected from them as well. And then we go back to the investor side in actually investing in banks.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Because it is also, banks are a little bit like water, to my view. They're involved into absolutely all industries all around the place, and they're critical. So very interesting. Now, everything we're talking about, and I think we made that point very clearly, everything we're talking about requires data and requires a change in behavior. So I'd really like to turn to you, John, and ask, what it is that you've seen in terms of changes in internal audit. I mean, how do internal auditors, take these new risks also into account? Reference was made to the WEF risk reports. Is that, hitting the desk of internal auditors? John?
Yeah, well, I think internal audit has two different roles in the whole ESG journey. First is the transition phase, in which we, if needed, help in creating awareness with the board and senior management level, because they need to drive and monitor the implementation of ESG. But the internal audit can also perform a number of audits in that change period, and looking at the strategic intents, whether they are clearly and sufficiently translated into goals, a good roadmap, and clear KPIs. Also looking at the double materiality assessment, whether that has been performed in a good manner. Also look at whether ESG is fully integrated into the enterprise risk management framework of the company. And then, of course, looking at the risk responses in adequacy of policies, adjustments of procedures and processes, culture and behavioral changes, not to forget, and then ultimately looking at the internal controls built into the processes to make sure that the strategic objectives are achieved. And at the end, looking at reliable data coming out of those processes. So data not being the starting point, but the end point. And then after the implementation, the transition phase, if everything is fully integrated, it is just the business as usual for internal audit to look at the processes and controls and also the governance and risk management around it. But in the new situation, the question is whether internal audit also has a role in the assurance chain. We believe that if a board is asking for information on achievement of strategic objectives. Internal audit should have a role during the year in providing that assurance. And then we hope that the external auditor will be able to rely on that work and take it on board for their role in the assurance chain. And we are currently discussing that with Accountancy Europe, as you know, and that's not defined yet. But I think what is material for the role of control and also the role of audit is that ESG is fully integrated into the business. That will allow both types of auditors to also integrate it into their normal work.
Thank you. I'm not going to ask Wim to react because otherwise we're going to have a great conversation, but it's going to be a conversation only focused on internal and external auditors. And there is a great question actually coming from the audience. Well, a number of questions around the same theme, which basically is asking whether today boards have the competencies that are needed actually to sign off on, the sustainability report, but also, more broadly to understand the sustainability challenge. So in other words, do we have the right skill set and competencies in the boardroom? And it's interesting because it's a question, that we ask ourselves regarding banks during the financial crisis. So this crisis is, to my view, much bigger, I think. Sandra, I know you've been doing some work on that. So do you think that boards are currently equipped with the right skill set? And I'll get back to you, Gilda, specifically on the banking sector. So Sandra, what do you think? Tell us. You can start with an apology, as you did earlier, but this time to the community of board members, maybe.
I won't start with an apology on that, Olivier, because I think it's really a very it's a very key question, and it's not a question that is exclusive to the debate on sustainability. It's a general question about board composition and board culture. I think you started the webinar with saying that it was about asking questions. I would even put it a little bit broader. It's about the right people asking the right questions, and that is what board work is always about. And so to come back to this specific question, no, we don't have yet the expertise that is needed on boards of directors. So there are three stages, I think. What do we need on boards to advance on sustainability? We need awareness. And as I said, there's a difference between sensitive and non-sensitive sectors, but due to legislation and climate litigation, awareness is growing. Once we have awareness, and I think today we have awareness, we need expertise. And once we have expertise, or together with the expertise, we need courage. And I think courage is also a significant, necessary element to advance on sustainability. Do we have expertise today? No, we don't have sufficient expertise today. What we see in research is that there are different models of integrating sustainability in board decision making. So it can go from a not integrated at all model with some people that have a certain expertise in sustainability, and Chapter 0 is working on that. Other organizations, Shubena also is working on that, to expertise really integrated in one of several committees. So some companies have a sustainability company. For others, it's audit the committee. And that's the ideal model: sustainability integrated in the whole board working, and in all levels of decision making. So what we say in corporate governance is there is no one size fits all. So it really depends on the company, on the stage of evolution, the stage of maturity in sustainability matters also of the company, and it depends on the sector. But independently of the model chosen, we need sustainability expertise, and it's and what kind of expertise? Because I also I've seen in the chat that the question from the audience is if the topic of climate and sustainability is too complex for boards to understand in depth. Do we need boards to understand in detail all the reporting requirements? No, we don't. We are not talking about legal expertise here. We are talking really about the strategic expertise that is necessary, again, I repeat myself, to link the whole reporting requirements regulation framework with the transformation of the business model. And that is what we need at board side, sufficient expertise to be the engine between between the movements and to exercise the oversight that is needed to make sure that the reporting is being done in a strategic way.
Yeah, thank you. You know what, Sandra? I'm really sorry for you, but I'm not going to let you get away with something you've said. You've said something, to my view, critically important. It's the need for courage.
Yeah.
We don't always know what it is. We don't always know what it means, but I'm going to ask you if you see enough courage in boards today.
So if I think, thank you, Olivier, for asking this question, because I think, and it might be of great help to the audience, in the Belgian Corporate Governance Code 2020, there is a very nice definition of courage. So let's start with that. I don't have it in front of me now, so I will try to quote it by heart. It's like having the ability to speak up, to resist to group thinking, and to share your views, and to challenge the management, and to challenge the other directors. So that is the definition of courage given by the Belgian Corporate Governance Code, and I think it's a very nice definition. It's a very useful and practical definition because it allows to measure, and we are a scientific research institute, so we like to measure. It allows you to really measure courage during board meetings. So to come back on what you said to start the session with, Olivier, it's about asking the right questions. And so it's again about the right people asking the right questions. And do we see sufficient courage today on sustainability topics? No, we don't. I don't think board members are asking all the questions they should be asking. And I think you referred to a work carried out by Accountancy Europe and also with ecoDa, listing the questions that board members should ask. I think it's quite evident that it's the questions related to the three board roles. The strategic role: is our strategy sustainability, and is it feasible? Can we follow up on it? Second question, leadership: do we have the right people in place to carry out this sustainable strategy? And of course, the monitoring role: do we have accurate and data? Do we have the data we need? And do we have the processes of internal control to follow up on the execution of our strategy? So just it's very easy, but just do it, I would say, to use a slogan of some big company.
That needs to do it, by the way. Okay,
that needs
very
to
good.
do it.
I think you're making a very important point, Sandra, and thank you very much for that. Courage, I believe, is essential. So before going back to Gilda, I can't resist asking our two auditors, the internal auditor and the external auditor, their views on courage and whether in their respective domain they believe that there is enough supply of courage. Wim, do you want to start? Because that's at the core of the audit profession. So,
yeah, sure. So, well, I would agree with Sandra that I personally also don't see enough courage, and maybe two things to say here. On first of all, on, let's say, conducting. I don't know whether I said it correctly. Conducting courage or so doing it. I think the key recommendation, and it relates also partly to the questions like, are boards skilled enough? And I would agree, no, not if you look at the depth of sustainability and all that, but I would also say, and we discussed that, for example, on water earlier and beverages, etc. I think boards do have the skills to bring to understand the business model and to bring developments back and linked back to the business model. And that, I think, is what boards should do, is say, okay, and we are seeing it currently in working with companies. We lay out, if you like, their value chain. That's a very easy exercise. But that really helps to say, okay, if this is our value chain, if this is what we buy and this is what we sell and this is what we do with it, what then happens to the environment and what could happen to people? It's asking that simple question that I think is part of the courage, if you like. And I also don't see that enough. And what I particularly don't see is broadly is challenging the business model. So most boards, companies go with, we need to grow. That's an interesting assumption. We need to continue with our current products. That's also an interesting assumption. That boards, I think, are there to challenge and say, is this still the case in the environment we're in now? And I see then many stepping back. And by the way, I understand because I have an easy job to just share on this. But I have seen some good examples where I was speaking to the chair of a board of a large Dutch company who said, in the current environment, given the situation in the Netherlands that we are in, we can no longer continue with our business model. And I'm pushing my board and the CEO executives to reflect on this and to look for alternatives. And we're not going to solve it in 2 years, right? But that attitude really helps. And this company is known in the Netherlands also publicly of an executive that you see moving on in that direction. So this is, I think, what I see happening, and a bit coloring, if you like, to the courage that also I see somewhat what lacking. It has also to do with understanding what is the real value that we're talking about, right? Is that financial or more?
So in a way, is that the competitive advantage that Sandra was talking about, being, the ability to drop your current products that are not sustainable, to transform your business model and to move to something else.
Yeah, and that, of course, that's where the real courage is, right? So to step away from your current business model and put a bet on something else. So solar panels 10 years ago was not a good bet. At the time, it was not a good bet. Now it is, because now we all have our solar panels and we try to accelerate it. But 10 years ago, there were entrepreneurs who said, like, should I step in solar? It's not picking up. So some put a bet and they call it one, and others did not because they wanted to stick to their current business model. And we know of some of the energy companies that have similar approaches, right? We know in 10 years whether they were right or wrong.
If we talk about solar panels, I always find it interesting to see that in the 70s, a US president got solar panels installed on the White House. And at the end of the 70s, another US president get them off. And I won't give names, but I'm sure you see what I think. Sandra, I think you really wanted to intervene in this discussion. Is that correct, or do I move on to John right away?
No, it's correct, Olivier. If you allow me, I just wanted to react to what Wim was saying. I think it's about re-becoming a startup. I mean, it's about reinstalling the innovation culture and mindset of a starting company, and it is, of course, a very complex procedure for established companies with a lot of stakeholders. So I'm not saying, I think Wim is not saying that either. It is not an easy procedure. It's very difficult because there is a lot of stakeholders' interest to be taken into account. So it's really very complex, and I think they have really, but they should be having these debates. And the problem is today that in a lot of boards, they're not even having the discussion, and that's what we are pointing out. That is the real problem. It's not about it's not about the decisions they are taking. It's about just not having the discussion and just going on with business as usual without even asking the right questions.
Well, that's back to courage, basically. So thank you, Sandra. John, do you see enough courage in internal audits?
Yeah, well, it's hard to say because I don't visit myself at too many boardrooms, and the one that I'm visiting has a lot of courage. But I would say that to get to courage, you need to have knowledge and awareness. And like Sandra is saying, that is maybe lacking as well. When I'm a speaker somewhere and there are board members, I ask them the question: do you know what CSRD is having as additional duties and responsibilities for you? And many times they just don't know that they are responsible for identifying risks and impacts. They are responsible for translating those into business strategy and taking on board stakeholders' views. They are responsible for identifying and setting goals and targets. And they are responsible for reporting as well. But now the focus is on reporting very much, and the start of the journey is not enough discussed. So I would also say let's use the word courage also for internal and external auditors, but probably for everybody on this call, in this webinar, because we have to challenge the board on their responsibilities, because if they are not driving it, if they are not leading it, if they are not taking the steer, then it will certainly not move to the right direction.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good point. Gilda, I said I would come back to you. So from a financial sector perspective, I think there was a big discovery after the financial crisis that not all board members could understand financial products. Great discovery, by the way. Now, do you think that all board members or most board members can understand the sustainability challenge and know what to do about it and have the courage to change the business model?
Well, of course, the answer is, from everything we've heard from Sandra and John and Wim, the answer is no.
We're not going to have many friends today.
I mean, it's interesting what you bring up about banks. I mean, you know, the typical board, I can't imagine a board that doesn't have somebody who's an expert in finance and understanding the financial health of a company. So considering how important you know, these ESG questions have now become for the future survival of companies, it's just amazing that you don't have anyone who's an expert in sustainability and the science of all the impacts of climate. So it's absolutely necessary, but also coming back to what Sandra said, it's important that everyone have a general knowledge, just like you expect everyone to have a general understanding of finance and law and all the different aspects of the board. I mean, if you had a proper board, and so you have to work towards that. There's different ways to do that, but it's clear. And actually, maybe I'll mention a survey that Chapter Zero Brussels did last year of board members to understand the barriers to making progress. Interestingly, in that particular survey, and there are other ones, let's say between 75 and 90% of board members say that they are aware that that climate change is extremely important for the future of their company. And yet very few have actually taken action. And so the idea is to understand those barriers. One of the top ones is, not surprisingly, a lack of knowledge and understanding by the board members of the questions and how it affects their company and how it would affect their strategy. So you need a general knowledge. And when we talk about the solutions to dealing with these barriers, for Chapter Zero, one of those is education and upskilling of all the board members, so that they all can be on a same level, at least of the understanding of the science of the sustainable finance aspects of it, of the aspects that are important to their own business. At least at a high level, because I saw there was one question, do we need to know details? And again, the answer is not in great detail. You need experts possibly in your company, depending on what you're involved in. And then, perhaps also put on your board a person who isn't an expert in in sustainability and strategy and at a high level, and that can really help. You can also create a sustainability committee at the beginning in order to have a small group of board members focus on that together with an expert maybe that you bring from outside. So clearly this is something that is top of the list to address.
But a question I have is, what kind of expertise are we talking about? And that's going to be a question I will ask to everybody, because I think the big difference with sustainability is that it's a physical reality. And today we've become used to deal with strategy, finance, policy, litigation, laws, all these things that at the end of the day, in comparison to physical realities, are pretty abstract, and you can deal with them. Okay, you can insure yourself, you can hire a lawyer, but here it's a physical reality. There is a limit, there is a barrier. So do we need to have, more engineers, water engineers on board, ecologists, physicists? What kind of expertise are we talking about? And to echo the point that Sandra made on courage, I mean, would we need also a couple of psychologists and anthropologists on board? So who's going to take this one first? Or do we need external consultants? Sandra, you want to react to that?
Yeah, I want to react to that, because I think it's a general question, Olivier. It's not limited again to sustainability. It's about board composition. We need, as Hilda was highlighting, we need sufficient general expertise within the whole board, and some expertise, specific expertise, for some board members. Do we need to hire more external consultants? Yes, board members can, but they can. So since long time, they can hire external advice if they don't have sufficient expertise on board, and they need to do so. It's a part of their responsibility, because they have to be in a position, they have to put themselves in a position that makes them able to challenge the management. So if they don't have the expertise within the board, they need to appeal to external consultants to get the expertise. And so what we see within some boards, and then especially in the sensitive sectors, is that there are specific training programs on sustainability, but not sustainability in general, not on sustainability reporting, but on the technical, scientific elements related to the sector. And there we need to bring all the board members at the same level, at a sufficient level, to understand the change of the business model that is going on. So I don't know whether that is sufficient response to your question, but that is what is happening.
I think so, because if I hear what you're saying, the concrete first action that boards need to take is basically to do a board assessment and assess whether they have the right skills, not only today, but also tomorrow, and whether they've got the right processes internally to have this conversation and encourage courage, because courage can be shut down. Huh? Wim, I've seen your virtual hand, so you want to contribute to this discussion.
Yeah, thanks.
You will not recommend to hire auditors, will you?
No, well, in a way, yes, because I saw also a question on it in the chat, which is, should you, and I think, Olivier, you said, should you hire more engineers or anthropologists? How do you say that again? Psychologists. And then you said also external consultants. Now, my personal conviction is that the latter, the external consultants, can help to, I call it, set the scene, make you understand what it is about, what others are doing, etc. They can help to structure it, to help you get you through a process of what are we looking into, where should we look, and how should we set up a strategy, etc. But the implementation and the real understanding needs to be ultimately in the company. We heard the term double materiality. That's of course part of the standards. That is not a one-off exercise. That is something that you need to ingrain in your and embed in your risk management thinking. Like, if we do this, what are the risks to us, and what are the risks that we put to society and our people? You cannot leave that to an external consultant, because it can happen on a, call it daily or frequent basis. And then finally, maybe to the engineers, etc. For most companies, the knowledge is in the company, but you have to unpack it, if you like. So I learned from one of the companies that I worked with that they had a sustainability department. I would, by the way, recommend that if you need to get someone driving it and really bringing it all together and be your radar for the company, then I would say, set up a sustainability team, like you have a legal team, etc., to have the topic on the radar. But this company, the sustainability team was driving, and then they started to say, we need to embed it in our products, and the board was behind it. And they went to R&D, and they said, the next product you develop should be better than you have now, and it should be 10% less packaging, 10% less energy, 10% less pollution. Good luck. And then R&D people, they know all that. They know what gets into the product and how they should design, etc., and they get challenged. So I would not overemphasize the need for additional engineers, expertise, etc. Right? Much is in the company, but you need to kind of, get it to the surface.
Okay, so if I try to summarize that, I think we need to start from a board assessment, looking at board composition, board mindset, and board processes. Then we need to engage with specialized consultants on an ad hoc basis. There is no one size fits all. I think that was very clear. And we also need an ongoing education program. I think if I say that, I'd like to see what ECIIA thinks, because that's what you're doing at Chapter Zero, isn't it?
That's correct. But I just wanted to say that I agree completely with what Wim has said. I think it's really important that every board member feels it's part of their responsibility to begin understanding. So indeed, you have programs like the one of Chapter Zero, and also learning from other board members, which is something we do by bringing board members together regularly. We work together with Gumerna as well on this kind of education. But the important part of all that is we need the connection between the understanding of the impacts that are coming in climate change and the business of the company. And so you especially need the people of all the different backgrounds who then understand or begin to understand, because this is going to be a process. It's going to take time for people to understand everything. You use experts when you need them from outside, but I think all board members have to make the effort through these different means and connecting it to their business and their expertise.
So there's a question from the audience, actually, which I think is getting answered here. Which company department should be responsible for implementing sustainability? And then there is a sub-question, I would say, on sustainability standards. What I'm hearing is that it's basically a responsibility of all of us, basically, all in the company and primarily the board. So does that mean that we also need to implement, awareness programs across the company? Because the board is not isolated in a bubble. I mean, everybody needs to understand, from the cleaning man to the top engineer, right? Okay, so I'm making a note of all the additional practical, concrete suggestions you're making. Yes, please, Gilda.
So can I add something to that?
Of course.
All sorts of people in the company, and especially young people, want to be involved in that and want to believe their company is doing something real. I think you need to involve people across the company in this education process and the responsibility of figuring out what the company should do.
Okay. I mean, I'd like to get back to John, actually, from an internal audit perspective. Do you, as you have an overview of the entire company, do you think if you go down, outside of a boardroom, down to the floor factory, to a factory floor, I mean, do you see that the concern is on people's mind? Do you see that it is taken into account? Is that something that you internal auditors are being asked to look at also, not only by the board, but also by your colleagues really on the factory floor?
Yeah, I think the success of implementing ESG is in changing the business model and the culture and behavior. And for that, the tone of the top is of course extremely important. But what we see is that the tone at the middle is even more important, because you can have corporate values that fully include the intent that the company has, and sometimes if we compare companies, the corporate values are quite the same. But in this case, the tone at the middle is really important. And there, I think it was mentioned, I think by Gilda, that the staff, the younger staff, is basically a pull factor there. They demand to work for a company that is green enough in their view, and they'd rather go for a green company than for a little bit more salary these days. So I think that is a very good thing to use in making sure that at the factory floor and in every floor in the company, people talk about it, and that the connection between the tone at the top, tone at the middle, and the ground floor is achieved. And of course, in auditing culture and behavior, that is certainly something internal audit can be asked to take on board if they are not doing it already by themselves.
I think there's a question in the chat that is absolutely spot on when you talk about business model transformation, and it's about time and timing. So, in other words, how do you handle the fact that transforming to make you sustainable and gain a competitive advantage on the long term is going to undermine dramatically your competitiveness on the short term? How do you deal with this strategic dilemma? Who wants to take this one? That's probably the most difficult one. There is a timing dilemma, obviously. I mean, these transformations are not easy. These transformations are not coming without a cost. And indeed, you may do the right thing and become competitive and sustainable on the long term, but on the short term, you're basically facing, the competition of those who are not making these efforts and who are seizing, the opportunity of the day and just continue business as usual. How do you manage this, real strategic dilemma? And is that where policymakers need to do their job?
Yeah, I can maybe give it a first go from what I see happening, what I have seen happening. So there are a few approaches to this. So we have seen long time that a company started to communicate about the greenness of their product, right, which is now led to the Green Claims Directive, because there were unsubstantiated claims. But I still think and see that what keeps you at a competitive advantage, because you are, let's say, syncing with the sign of the times, is to communicate in the right way about sustainability. So a company that now would say in its external communications and around its products that they, and forget my word because I'm not a marketing person, but that they understand the climate issue and they are working on it with their products, and you should use their product in an efficient way, is addressing a sign of the times. That communication creates awareness externally and internally. The second that I've seen working is that is not the business model, but that is within the current business model, is to look for further efficiencies, if you like, and that already that serves two purposes. It makes your product more efficient, less materials, less energy, etc., and that saves costs for the customer, makes it cheaper. So that's where within the model you can apply sustainability. But then the most challenging one is, of course, but we're going to change the model, as we discussed earlier. There are we know of the Danish company, right, now Ørsted. They took a big bet, right, and they said we move fully to renewable energy, and they are so far succeeding. Others sell parts of their business to free up money to move into next type of products where they want to innovate, and others set up small, call it, I think Sandra used the word startup earlier, set up a kind of small startups within their current company to call it experiment, and ideally you don't do one, you do a couple, and hopefully one or more of these succeed, and then you can shift your model over time without impairing on your ongoing ROI, etc. Well, a little, of course, because you start a startup, but within your current business you can still create innovation, and also that creates a lot of awareness within the company. Hey, we are innovating, we are looking for new models. It inspires the younger people for sure. So that is some of the things that I see, and that could work. But I'm sure others have great examples as well.
I see, Gilda, you've got your hand up. Is it a legacy end, or you want to contribute to this discussion? Anyway, you've got no choice. I'm asking you. Okay, so tell us.
It's definitely this one. No, there's a couple of perspectives that I can give. The first one goes back to the survey I mentioned, because what it showed is that when companies start to get very involved in how they're going to meet the challenge, they start to integrate into their strategy and decision making, the percentage of companies that realize that this work is actually going to save their company money and make them more efficient gets larger and larger the further they go along. So really the importance of starting to work on this, going back to reporting, it's through that the data will help you to start really understanding what's going on in your company and what you could be doing in the future. So all of that is one side. And then I put my banker's hat on for the second idea, which is, well, it has to do with a long-term vision and also the way you communicate it. You have to be able to show the impact of your investment. So one thing that banks learned very well after the financial crisis was about scenario planning risks and really being able to project what will be the impact of things you do. And I think you need to start showing that. I've seen many cases of companies that once they announce certain investments that are going to make them more efficient in the future, are going to address what are impending risks, it actually improves the value of their company. If they're listed, I mean, the share price, it goes up. We've seen cases like Ørsted, many others. So you have to do the hard work. You have to be much more focused on how you portray your risks and how you scenario plan into the future. And then you have to communicate it well to the investment community and others.
Thank you very much, Gilda.
Maybe if I could add just one word, Olivier, on this, because I think looking at short-term impact of what companies are doing, certainly in the financial sector, they should also be aware that rating agencies are starting to ask more and more questions on ESG. And we talked already the war of talent. To recruit, to be able to recruit, you need to be showing your good directions as well. And also investor associations will start comparing annual reports on this and will start rating companies to invest in. So that's also part of the short term, but maybe the other side of the coin.
Thank you. I see, Sandra, you've raised your hand, and I was going to come to you because you mentioned one thing earlier that I found, critically important, and not really, in our mind right now. And I think it relates to this, strategic dilemma in timing. And you said something that I would, summarize with my own words as, policy and regulation are friends in reality. We always see them as enemies, but maybe today they are what create the level playing field for the pioneers. So tell me, what's your view on this strategic dilemma between short and long term? Is that a fair summary? Is that what you have in mind?
Not only. I think it's. I will come back to the policy question immediately, but I just wanted to summarize and maybe for the audience to give some very simple practical tools for decision making at board level. When confronted with mitigating between interests, whether it's short-term, long-term, or stakeholder A and stakeholder B, I think it's very important to realize that it is a roadmap. I know it is urgent, and I see Hilda looking very angry at me. I know the climate is urgent, but it is a roadmap. It might be a roadmap on a very short, limited period of time, but it is a roadmap. You cannot change a business model overnight. So stick to establish a roadmap, adapt it when necessary, but stick to the roadmap. And this roadmap may help to make the right decisions at the right moment. And a second instrument that is very important also, because this business model, transformation of this business model has to be financed, is the purpose. And I think in Belgium anyway, we are not using this instrument of purpose and the purpose of the company, defining together with the shareholders, together with the board, together with the management, together with the stakeholders, the purpose of the company, and sticking to this purpose is also a very good instrument to use when you have to choose between conflicting interests, whether it is stakeholders or long-term and short-term. So I think that at board level, these are very, very interesting tools to really tackle and to start with when you are at the beginning of the journey. And then to come to policymakers, Olivier, yes, indeed. I think it's very important that we have a clear regulatory framework. And so I would like to insist, I don't know whether there is policymakers listening. We need boldness and courage from company directors, but we also need boldness and courage from policymakers, especially within these election periods. So we need a clear vision and a level playing field, which is absolutely necessary to stimulate innovation and entrepreneurship, because we need the corporate world to do the transition. So we need this framework and we need this courage from policymakers.
So you're right. This is election time, so we're not going to get too political, but still, I can't resist. Maybe in addition to courage, it would be good to have a little bit of consistency at times and not start by overdoing and then undoing. Maybe consistency in policy is important, and maybe realism as well. I find it fascinating that we're asking companies to, contribute to meeting the 1.5 degree target, while a number of scientists are saying that it's already too late. So maybe there is a bit of a need for information as well, and courage and consistency, as you say. But we won't say more about this. There's a slightly more technical question, which I think is very interesting in the chat. And that's a question I'm going to start addressing to Wim, because he is involved in standard setting. He said that to us, right? And it's all about double materiality and how, we're going to implement double materiality, and whether, double materiality reporting will help us really identify the risk and will help us, drive the company forward. So your comments on double materiality, Wim, and I'll come to John after that.
So we can assume that everyone knows what double materiality is, but let me still say what the standards mean with it. So it means to say that as a company, for environmental, social, and governance topics, you look on the inside-out effects of your activities, your operations, and your products, and that you also look at your outside-in effects. So those are effectively the financial risk and opportunities for your company. So it's inside out and outside in, and then looking at the topics that matter most, so that are significant, and that is why it's called double materiality. What I have seen in practice is that for all companies who worked on sustainability for a long time and reported on it, by redoing the process, but now with the double materiality lens, first of all, they did not, of course, come to 20, 30, 40% new topics, right? That would be quite surprising. So they got mainly a confirmation of, yes, these are the topics that we need to focus on. But most of them also had one or two that got like, these should be on the radar now too, inside out. The most important one is then what we knew for climate for some years now is the financial risks and opportunities from climate change. But applying this also to other topics can create some very interesting insights. Namely, and let us go back to that topic of water. If we don't address the issue of water usage, or when we start investing in our next factory, we need to look into the area where we're going to build this, because if it's in a water scarce area, we may need to impair the value of that asset before it finalizes its normal economic life. So it brings, I think, additional value also to the company. And I also want to link it back to the topic of today, which is, if double materiality is applied properly, it serves the reporting. That's why you have to do it. But more importantly, it should also serve the board insights on where are our risks and opportunities from what we're doing, and where do we have the most significant impact by conducting that double materiality analysis. I think, Olivier, this deserves a webinar in itself on all the pros and cons and ins and outs of double materiality. So let's not do that today. But let me just end this reflection with saying double materiality is about finding the topics that you need to focus your efforts on, from risk perspective or from impact perspective. Take it as an exercise that is not a technical exercise only, and don't make it too technical, even though auditors might ask you to make it technical. Keep it to what the purpose is of double materiality and link it to your business.
Well, thank you, Wim, and I agree with you. We could go on for another 8 hours, but we only have 8 minutes, actually. So your very short contribution, John, to this issue, or any comment in relation to what Wim said?
Well, Wim did a terrific explanation, of course. The only thing I would like to mention, that in the double materiality assessment, it's really important that to also know the broader interests of your stakeholders, because that needs to be taken into account. And I think after the double materiality assessment the first time, you need to also integrate that in your ERM system, because this is the new way of doing it. So that's part of the integration. And my last comment would be that the data points that come out of this assessment then need to be having a reversed look back to the strategy to make sure that for these points there is a strategy, there is a roadmap, there are KRIs and processes are or will be changed for that purpose. And that's what in practice might be overlooked now, because it's the data, so we look only for data and we are not changing from the start of the process.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, John. So as I was saying, we're reaching, unfortunately, the end of this webinar. So I'd like to, ask a question to each of you. And I think you've all contributed to making the case that a just transition is now urgent, is a matter of extreme defining importance. So I think that point has been well made by everybody. Now, what is the one, and I say one, key action that you would recommend board to take tomorrow morning? So they're gonna, leave this webinar. They'll think about everything you've said, but I want you to leave them one key message on what it is that they need to do tomorrow morning. So shall I start with you, Gilda?
Sure. I would say put one foot in front of the other and just start.
Yeah, you need to start. That's a very good point, actually. I think Martin Luther King said something like that. When you don't know where you want to go, you just have to start. Yeah. John, what's your point? Your key message to boards?
Well, I would say reporting well enough, but not doing well enough does not make any sense. So let's go from the duty to report to the duty to act.
That's an excellent point. Thank you very much. Wim?
Yeah, I would make it very practical. I would say go on an offsite and reflect on the fundamentals of the business model.
Thank you, Wim. Sandra, I think you will have the last word today.
Yeah, because everything that they have to do has been said already. I will make my wish about what they should not do. They should stop complaining about the burden of reporting and take it as a tool to advance on sustainability.
Okay. Is that also a recommendation to policymakers, by the way? Maybe, yeah. Okay, interesting. On the point on consistency, I think. Well, I'd like to really thank the four of you for a great conversation. I hope it's been informative to our audience. I think, you've provided a lot of insights. I made a lot of notes on things I will need to think about. And we will think about this because I mentioned earlier, in the introduction, that we did this paper together with ecoDa and ECIIA. Well, we're working on a follow-up to that, where we will focus more on some of the actions. So please stay tuned. Look at our respective website. It's coming up soon. But I think we're, are all on this journey. And I think one of the key points that is arising from this webinar for me today is that we need to work together. I think we've had plenty of discussions between internal audit and external audit. That's one thing. But indeed, we need to all connect with boards across the departments of the same business. We need to break the silos because sustainability is a systemic issue. And you can't have someone working on sustainability somewhere in a silo and continuing, business as usual. So this is a journey on which we're all embarked together. I noted a couple of very important points into all your great contributions. But I think, John, you hit the nail on the head, as they say. We first need to do before we start thinking about reporting and providing assurance. If we don't transform, there is nothing to report. So, I can't agree more. Let's start with doing. But I also heard very important comments on the need for courage. It is quite a bold, step that we need to take collectively. So we need courage, and I don't think we're teaching courage. So we'll have to collectively think about what it means and start, all of us, are delivering on that. I thought it was also great, the point on re-becoming a startup. Well, yes, we have to restart reinventing business, and not follow the recipes that we've been taught, but really reinvent business, finally taking into account the physical constraints that we have and the social realities. So I think, it is about reinventing business and re-becoming a business. Also, I thought it was very, very spot on And I think it's you, John, who made that point. The tone at the middle. We always talk about the tone at the top, and sometimes I'm a chief executive, so I know what I'm talking about. The tone at the top can get lost in translation at times. So I think the tone at the middle is critically important. And the tone at the middle is actually something that younger colleagues can take, responsibility for. And they are the ones who will have to transform us, the older generation, if we have a chance to survive this challenge. So thank you very much for all your contributions. Thank you to the audience. I'm sorry we couldn't answer all the questions. I think, we will meet again, and you will look at our papers. We've got also plenty of tools, as Sandra was calling for, especially on SMEs, because this is an issue for all of us, not only the large multinationals, but also the SMEs and us citizens and stakeholders. So thank you very much for today. I hope you find it useful, and I'm sure we'll meet again. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a nice day.
Likewise. Bye, everybody.